All right, hello and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're on the West Coast. My name is Vincent Donadio, Interactive Media Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory. If you follow and interact with us on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or visit our website, I'm the guy on the other side of the tube, so come say hi. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs today and in the future. This morning we have Joanne Hackos with us. She's going to tell you a little bit about what she does, and then she's going to jump right into our webinar. And Joanne, you can take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. And thank you for joining us at the second installment of our Crossing the Chasm with DITA. This is now the part 2 of the presentation. And I hope everyone is hearing me okay so far. Okay, good. And I think I have control now, and I can advance the slides. Okay. As Vincent said, this webinar is a joint webinar between Linda Morone from Data Conversion Lab and myself from Context Services. And there's a little information, as Vincent said, about what Data Conversion Labs is involved in. And especially we'll be talking today about the conversion process and some of the decisions that you need to make as you're getting content ready to go. And getting a fair amount of, there we go. And here's just a little bit about Context Services. We've been in the information development business for more than 30 years now. Many of you, I'm sure, have interacted with us time and time again with workshops and conferences. But we also, as you know, are a professional consulting organization. We do a lot of work helping people set up content management projects, especially in recent years. You know, we've done an awful lot of work, of course, with the DITA implementation process. And I'm especially concerned, and we'll talk about today, of making sure that you have a good process to follow, and that you can move along successfully. You know, keep your promises in terms of business gains and productivity gains, and really overall be really successful. We've created a quick list of the kinds of companies that we've worked with, both our organizations. We kind of combined this slide. And I'm sure for many of you, you'll see your organizations on that. It may not be with the projects you're directly related with, but it might have been something, some other group, especially with big companies, likely to be other groups. And we'll talk about some of these experiences today as we go through our review today of the process of getting started and implementing it in your workplace. So I can get to the first slide. Sorry, these are a little slow. Hopefully they're coming across for you okay. The premise behind this whole 3-part series has been the concept of crossing the chasm. DITA adoption, we feel, has really changed since the first of the innovators, like my organization and those of us who were involved in the original the draft of the DITA specifications from OASIS. It's been 7 or 8 years since we actually got started with, creating an atmosphere in which DITA could be successful in organizations as a small group of innovators. Since that time, we've really seen the adoption by a number of people who we would call early adopters. In part, they've taken a chance to try something new. In the last first part of this webinar, I talked a lot about several organizations that have seen, who were early adopters, who've gone through some of the challenges of early adoption and are now reaping the benefits and really seeing significant changes in in productivity and dramatic cost savings. And then last time in part one, we talked about this move across the chasm. And it's something that I've been really, seeing in the environment, especially within the last 6 months. Additional companies that we had not heard from before really saying this is something we need to do. Organizations that are saying, we can't continue creating content, especially with increased pressures of time and resources. We can't continue to keep creating content in the old way. And this is where, what we're judging is that DITA has moved across the chasm, using the analogy with Jeffrey Moore's book, when he traced the kind of split from, new technology and then when it starts to take off. And last time I described some of the challenges to the early majority in being prepared, in getting to understand what DITA is all about, and then building a good business case, getting some preliminary training, reading books and articles that are available. So today, we're going to take the early majority to past the getting started phases into the first project. And we're going to call that first project a pilot project. Now, last time I also showed how we focused in part one on innovators and early adopters, and now in part two, we're going to focus on the early majority and the processes that will make you successful as a new implementer. Okay, so what does this roadmap look like? The things that we're going to cover today, this road to travel to success, is going to include 3 components. The first is sort of a broad view of what I'm going to refer to as a pilot or a first project. And we're going to have several different pieces to that we'll talk about. Then Linda's going to take us through the content conversion process and talk about the things that you have to ask yourself, analyzing your content and being prepared. And then we're going to end today with the issue of technology acquisition. So we kind of take you through that whole preliminary roadmap. The constituents of this roadmap are really pretty nicely illustrated in this DITA timeline. And this is an illustration that I used in part one, where we really talked about these early planning steps. Now we're moving into this larger timeline as a whole. And you'll see we have divided it into information modeling, conversion as a process within information modeling, a start of a pilot project, the post-pilot activities, the style sheet activities, actually some training for your team members to get them started. And we're going to talk a little bit about how these things overlap, because it's not quite so neat as this drawing kind of makes it. But these are the kinds of things that you're going to be looking at in your initial project. And remember always, in terms of your business presentation, that you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You don't want to convert the ocean. You don't want to start every department in doing everything at once. You want to start small, and you want to be successful. And that's the process we'll outline, I think, pretty carefully today. Okay, so let's look a little bit farther about the pilot project, of establishing this and thinking about what has to be included. And it's a question I get all the time. In fact, I can dedicate this presentation to Dan, Trudy, and Kelly, because we had this discussion actually yesterday. How do we get going? What are the steps? What are the pieces that we need to do? And my character here, who's looking fairly relaxed, has a lot of questions. So if we bring these up, one of the things that people will say is, well, how do I decide, what should a pilot project be? And what are the things that I need to take into account in making choices? Certainly I don't want to boil the ocean. I don't want to have, convert 100,000 pages at one time. How do we really get started? And what are the steps for that? And that's one of the things we'll address. Do we really need an information plan? I mean, so many people don't know what this is. They haven't thought about, well, there's a DITA model, but you know, does all of it apply to us? How do we pare it down? How do we make decisions for our writers? And information model is something that we consider to be absolutely essential. When I visit with organizations that haven't created their own information model for their DITA implementation, we find serious problems, really serious problems. People who are doing things differently, individuals doing things differently, style sheets that don't always work, errors that are coming up in tagging, you know, it's just and also information that isn't reusable because it isn't written in the same structured way. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what an information model is and what the constituent parts of that are. Third kind of question I would bring up, and this is one that Linda's going to address this morning, is our content ready to convert? You know, do we convert everything? Do we start small? How do we stage it out if we do have to get everything, we want to get everything moved over? And we're going to really address that in some detail today. My fourth question, can we just download the DITA Open Toolkit? Actually, I love this question. You know, it's because it's so mistaken. DITA is a specification. You know, all of you know what, I hope you know what specifications are if you deal in the software or hardware industry. It's a set of the rules that everyone is going to follow in implementing a new product. But DITA also comes with an open source DITA Open Toolkit. And I think a lot of people assume that, well, I'll just download that. And what you can find out is that it's not a tool. You know, it's really, it's all of the background processing, and that first of all you need, of course, an XML editor to work in unless you want to work in Notepad. But, you know, it's complex, and it's better, you know, you're better off if you have an environment that supports it, and you don't have to assume that this is the way you should learn from the first. I see a lot of people going, for example, to the DITA Yahoo user group and asking questions that says, I'm a total newbie, I've just downloaded the Open Toolkit, and now what? And, you know, and basically it says, boy, that's not the way to start. You know, take a course, read a book, read some articles, you know, learn about it first, and then you'll be, you know, much more likely to be successful. Well, of course, we're always going to have the techies who think this is a lot of fun, and that's good because, you know, their skills are needed, but it's not the place necessarily to start. Certainly not your pilot project. Another question we get about the first project, how much time is it going to take? And, you know, if you look at that timeline, you'll see something that's stretched out about 5 months. I think we started in earnest in late July, early August, September, October, November. Things were getting wrapped up for the pilot. So that was a project of 3 or 4 months. It's a fairly significant project. And then some post-analysis to see where everything was at the end. 3, 4 months, 5, 6 months. Part of that's dependent upon the complexity of your implementation, as well as the availability of your people. You know, do you have people who have time to devote to this while at the same time they're meeting their existing deadlines? And that can be a real challenge for some organizations, and really stretch out the first project to a year, sometimes even more than that. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you lose a lot of momentum, but it does happen. And finally, my last question in this one is, are we going to have to rewrite everything? The answer to that is maybe. In some cases, no, because we've seen beautiful conversions of really nicely structured tasks, primarily tasks, a few concepts and a little reference that have been, where organizations have been following a good style guide. They have guidelines for structured writing in their Word or FrameMaker environment, and the conversion goes beautifully. In other cases, we've had to do cleanup. Sometimes we do that cleanup in an existing system like FrameMaker, unstructured FrameMaker, or in Word, and then convert the content, probably still needing some more cleanup. In other cases, we've decided we have to rewrite everything because the original content was written by non-professionals, coming from all kinds of sources, and it's really just all mixed up. So there's a lot of answers to these kinds of questions, and we'll really look at this as we go along in a little bit more detail. Following the DITA roadmap, though, I want to talk about these things as we go through the activities today. First of all, creating an information architecture team that is charged with developing a targeted information model for your organization. Taking the DITA standard and adapting it in ways that it's going to work for you and be informative. The second part, harmonizing, evaluating your legacy content so that you know something about maybe the possibilities for reuse strategy and also what opportunities, at least at one level, are going to have to be cleaned up. Then convert existing content as you need to during your pilot phase, and then throughout the subsequent phases as you introduce more content into the system. In some cases, you're going to have to reshape your current content to make it information typed and structured in a way that is going to make it reusable and shareable in a collaborative setting. Don't forget that you're going to have to establish a specification for your publishing requirements. If you're producing a PDF, XHTML, various help systems, ebooks, other kinds of requirements, you need a specification so that the DITA XML can be appropriately converted to whatever outputs you need. But what that output is supposed to be is actually written down someplace. And finally, making sure that you have a good publishing pipeline to go through your whatever toolkits you're using, the DITA Open Toolkit, CMS environment, and so on. So this is the kind of roadmap we'll follow today. Defining a project, a pilot project, I think it's really putting on the line a test of the possibilities. I got an email this morning from a person we're working with on a very small pilot project, and she said, even on just this small pilot project, she's able to wow the business leaders in the organization. She says, I love showing them because she's got her topics organized. We've got a preliminary style sheet in this project. We've been working on it less than a month, and she's got output. She says, I love to show them that I can push a button and in 30 seconds I have a final document. She's making that point with her business leaders, and she's getting, attention and good feedback and good opportunities. So what does it need to be? Small enough to be manageable. Something that is not so explosive that if something goes wrong, you're going to get into big trouble. But not huge, 2 to 3 months maybe to be completely completed, reasonably self-contained. The content we've been looking at is one unique chunk of content with lots and lots of reuse possibilities. It's representative of at least one of their many content types. To get it going, you need a good team. People who are enthusiastic, open-minded, are willing to change, who think that change can be exciting and know that the kinds of content maybe that they've been developing has not met user needs or has been very inefficient to create. These are people who will become the future project leaders. And as you start rolling out more and more projects, you've got people then in your pilot team who have had experience at a time probably when things can go wrong or when there seems like a lot of decisions to make. And they're willing to work their way through it, and they don't get upset about it or they don't become negative and create a negative atmosphere. They also, of course, have to have some time to devote to the pilot, to work on their content, to help make decisions about the information model. And then for the pilot, you need to have some kind of authoring environment. We usually recommend to people that they start with an editor. There are, lots of good choices of good DITA compliant XML editors, and that list continues to expand. but they're good, solid products out there, and they usually can let you do a 30-day download, as a test that might be sufficient for your pilot, or you might have to buy a few licenses to this for the pilot project. You also want a way to keep track of the material you're creating. Basic version control systems set up on a server can work just fine. And, you can even do just plain server folders and files as long as you're really careful about how you save things, the standards that we usually impose on a good server environment. But realize that some organizations do go out and get a component content management system right away. But it is necessary to do that, and it may make your pilot project simpler if you're focusing on your content and your authoring and the good decisions, important decisions you have to make to transform your content into a DITA compliant structure. Okay, so if you've got your pilot project there, then how do we continue working? I hope everybody can hear okay. And I see there are some questions coming along, but we'll wait for these now. Vincent is going to set up a little poll for us. We have 2 poll questions we'd like you to answer at this point. One is, have you defined your pilot project? No, we haven't yet. Yes, it's a good idea. And here's the first one. So go ahead and answer the question, and we'll see what happens. I think, Vincent, we've got pretty much everybody responding so far. I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to share the results. There you go. 40% of you are saying, great, you have one underway now, and that's really good to hear. And I'm hoping that you'll see that there's a lot of things that we ought to ensure that are part of that pilot. Another 24% say, yes, we've got an idea of what to do, although we haven't started yet. And then 37% are saying, no, you haven't started yet. Okay, so there's a lot of things that we need to be paying attention to here. Okay, Vincent, can you bring back the my slide for me? There we go. Okay, now that means we've got, about a kind of almost an equal representation of where you are with pilots. Now I'm going to ask another key question, and that is, do you have an information fully defined? And I'll start with, no, we didn't know we needed one. Yes, we've started it, and yes, we've completed it. So let's go ahead and bring up the second poll and see where we had come with that. Okay, here we go. And we're getting some really rapid results here. Wow. Okay, looks like pretty much everybody has voted. I'm going to close the poll. And really interesting results in this one. And share the results. There we go. Wow, we got 30% who didn't know we needed one. Okay, you're in the right place at the right time. We've got 50% have said they've started, but only a very small number, which is neat, because if you're getting the right content, I think, that says we have one completed. So we've got a good start then, and a lot of people who are here for all the right reasons. Now let me hide the results, and we can go back to our slide. There we go. And hopefully I can get to the next one where we're going to talk about the information model. Okay, whoops, come on. There we go. Information model establishes the rules that you need for your DITA standards. And it starts out with the DITA information architecture itself. That's comprehensive. It supports many, many requirements. You're never going to have all of them. So your information model is a record of the decisions you make on what you're going to use and what you're not going to use in the complete DITA architecture. A lot of people say, oh, it's too complex, there's too much in it. Yes, right, that's true, because it's designed for lots and lots of different uses. Well, we have mechanisms in place like constraints and limited models and that help you limit what you're doing. The information model is also documented. It records the descriptions and examples that show exactly how your authors are going to use your DITA standard in your organization. Without it, you're going to have potentially an awful lot of inconsistency and potentially a lot of chaos in how people are creating things because they don't know what to do. They don't know which direction to take. So what are the parts that we have in a good information model? I said it's the DNA of your information, of your implementation, the underlying structures. In it, we want to define a lot of things. We want to define what our information types are. Are we using task, concept, and reference, the things that come prepackaged with the technical communication standard? Are we using the learning and training specialization? Do we have a need for something else, that's something that doesn't quite fit in the standard? Do we need all the pieces of the standard? So we decide on information types, and then we drill down. What do we need in the information types? Are we going to use a short description, or we are not going to use a short description in all of our topics? Are we going to allow concepts to be divided into subsections with a second level of heading? Or do we say, if we have a second level of heading, we want to start a new concept? Those are all of the details that you have to decide how you're going to implement. Like, what do you mean by a prerequisite and a postrequisite? What are examples of that in the task? What about the inline elements? Do you have sort of undefined bold and italic all over your documents? Well, what do they mean? There are DITA tags for that. We don't use bold and italic if we can avoid it, but we might use user input or menu cascade or UI control, with specific names for things, because that will enrich our content, enrich the XML data that's part of our content. How are we going to put our metadata together? What is that going to contain? How are we going to label content for conditional processing? Do we have content that's for specific audiences within one topic, or do we have content that has modifications for different product types all within the same content, same topic? How are we going to make those modifications? And those are all the metadata discussions that you're going to have to make. Map structures. DITA means you're combining topics into maps. Do you have standards for the way you want to construct maps? Is there a standard for your user guides or your reference manuals? How is it organized? What are those parts supposed to represent? What's your reuse strategy going to be? So, and Linda will talk a little bit more about that, because the conversion process can help you find reuse opportunities. But what are you going to do? Are you going to use conrefs? Are you going to use key refs? If I'm using this jargon that DITA, you have to know what those things are and whether or not they're going to apply in your organization, and just how you're going to do those things. How are you going to name your files? Is there a standard that everybody's following? If it's all going to be in the folders of a CMS or in the metadata structure of a content management system, we need to have standards around those conventions that work for everybody. And then finally, how can we build some authoring guidelines, especially once we have our system implemented in the content management system? What are the guidelines going to be for new authors coming into this process? Are we going to have a handbook of guidelines that they can use? So all of these become part of that really important information model. I know this is a quick review of information models. We've got several articles available on it that you can go to and read. And we have a workshop coming up in North Carolina in, I think, later in March. Okay, so let's go on and talk a little bit about, if you're working through your information model, you have a lot of content to sift through. DCL's Harmonizer, which we'll explain in a second, helps you do that sifting through a large volume of legacy content, looking for opportunities. It helps you build your reuse strategy that becomes part of your information model. Most groups find, of course, that they have some content that they've got to rewrite from scratch because they look at it and they say, this makes no sense. I don't understand, why we even wrote this. What is it getting at? Some we have to revise to meet a new set of standards. And others, we're going to say it's low priority stuff. Maybe we'll convert it later, but right now it's not important, or it's end of life or near end of life, or we can't figure out why anyone would want to know this. Let's drop it and do something better, with the new content going forward. Now, at this point, I'd like to transfer this over to Linda Moroni, who's going to talk specifically about the conversion process. So it's up to you, Linda.
Thank you, Joanne, and hello, everyone. I wanted to touch base on the reuse issue before we really move into how you lay out your plan. And I think, one common theme that you're hearing, certainly from the previous session and again in today, how important preparation, planning, expertise, and so on and so forth are to a successful implementation of DITA and other standards for that matter. But one of the issues we find often is that we receive data sets sometimes from global organizations, across divisions, across product types, varying issues involved in that data set. And when we start really looking through it and certainly trying to evaluate how much of that content has reusability even in its raw state, that's where Harmonizer comes in. And I certainly don't want to begin my section with a DCL Harmonizer commercial, but I have to tell you, as I travel to conferences and certainly being involved with Joanne's organization, best practices, so on and so forth, one of the most painful points for any team coming into conversion is how the heck do I begin to identify how much of my content is actually redundant? And that's exactly what Harmonizer does. It's probably the best kept secret, shame on us, that there is out there. But it does enable us to really quickly, through the use of software, identify down to the paragraph level the commonalities. So what are exact matches and what are very close matches? So again, we can considerably cut down the conversion project. We have, I have to keep names out of this, but we have saved in a very recent case as well, up to 70% of the conversion project. So if you can think of the impact that would have for you and your team, it's considerable for sure. But let's go on, because as you begin to make really your business case on how do you get this project done, is it right for you, so on and so forth, which we're going to talk about here, I'm going to tell you about one of the other serious pain points we often run into. And that is perception, potentially perception of your own, your management team, your production team, wherever this hiccup may be. It is a process that you have to move past in order to be able to really have a successful implementation. And the concept of converting legacy data clearly can be a daunting task and one that can derail many integration projects if the proper process is not in place early in the equation. But many proper processes are derailed because of the perceptions that people have. And therefore, they may look to leave behind critical data and make decisions that really are not good for the company long term. So next slide, Joanne. The reality is that really by engaging the right level of expertise and putting the proper planning in place, early in the equation, your conversion project will be much more successful, bring you a higher level of accuracy, and ultimately lower costs because it's going to keep you more on target. So all of the ideas behind these misconceptions that teams can have really do not need to be part of the equation when you put the proper plan in place. And you're going to hear it again and again and again through not only the rest of this session today, but subsequent sessions. And we just can't, I don't think there's enough that we can say to drive that point home. So Joanne, if you would advance, please. You know, the value really comes from determining your business requirements. What are the business reasons for taking this data along with the rest of your implementation? Is your content important to your business long term? Will the structured content help you increase revenues? Will it help you decrease expenses? These are all questions that you need to consider. If the answer is yes, then you have to make conversion of that legacy content a major part of the whole process. And again, you know, you can't look at what your costs are per se in the early stages. You have to consider the overall investment that you are making and the ultimate ROI that you are looking for once the project is completed. Joanne, if you will flip for me, please. So let's begin to really look at how do we develop this plan. And again, you know, you have many options, and no one can make those decisions for you other than you, your team, and as they relate to the business case you have in place. You know, but as you look at it, there are really three ways. I always talk about the fact you can, you can't, you do, you don't, you will, you won't, but in reality, that's true. You can look at converting nothing. And clearly you're not going to have any conversion cost, but you're also going to have a significantly delayed ROI. So what does that choice mean to you, to your business over the long term? Option two, convert everything. Rarely is this really a viable option. Rarely do we see instances where every piece of content is going to be critical to the business long term. And clearly, by doing so, you are going to have a reduced ROI. Because, yes, you'll have structured content, but much of it may not have any value to you long term. And lastly, the ideal is really convert frequently used documents. And in some cases, your content management system may enable you to store content for future conversion so that you don't lose it altogether. There are many different ways that you can look at this. And certainly as we begin to evaluate what really makes sense for you and your organization, these are the types of consideration that we put into place. Joanne, if you'll move on, please, for me. So now we look at really, okay, we've identified how much of our content is reusable. We have made the decision that we're only going to convert the documents that clearly are valuable to us and frequently used and supporting internal and external processes. So now we have to look at how do we manage the migration. And again, you have options available to you. Certainly, you can look at a DIY project. You can look at outsourcing. You can look at a combination of the two or adding in a few other elements if that makes sense for you. But I must tell you that at no matter which area you go into, having the right expertise behind you is going to be critical. And it's very idealistic to feel that you're going to come into a project of this magnitude and be able to handle it with internal resources completely. And in many cases, what we find is that hybrid can help. If you do have the resources available, at least hire an expert, hire the subject matter experts, bring in the guide, bring in the team that you need to help to support your team, helping potentially with project management or whatever might be the case. But your people are clearly as important as the technology. And as you're looking and making decisions throughout the course of this process, you have to really, truly evaluate, is our team up to this type of project on their own, or does it make more sense for us to outsource it? Do we have to pull a team away from other critical activities in order to put them onto a conversion project? And what does that do to our overall business schedule, so on and so forth? And then you have to look at the process. You have to have a process in place that you can truly live with. You know, we see a lot of conversions that go awry, not only, by the way, when performed in a very manual process with a DIY team, but in some cases with other types of processes that have been touted as the magic or the silver bullet. One component that is always compromised is quality. And you have to understand that, as Joanne had mentioned earlier, clean up early, clean up later. Cleanup is going to be a part of it. But there is no bigger ROI that you can generate other than having a project that is completed on time with the highest level of accuracy and, you know, frankly, does not need to have a considerable amount of work done on it on the back end as well. So if you really want to make certain that you keep your project on target, the process is going to be critical. Joanne, if you can move on. I'm going to kind of walk you through at this point what an ideal process would look like in the best case scenario. Some of this is not going to be applicable if you are a team that decides to perform conversion on your own, in particular automation, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, analysis. And we're going to say, by the way, that this is a 5-step proven process, and I must stress that. So anyway, let's back up for a second and look at, again, step 1, analysis. How closely does your content match your information model? And that is going to be critical to the outcome of the overall conversion process. And keep that in mind. Where do the tasks start and stop? We often find threaded content, so everything is all mixed up, potentially coming from all different authors. Very difficult to weave your way through all of that. So getting that type of analyzation done early on is going to be very critical to the rest of the process, and you cannot move forward without clearly having every step defined based on how your content is currently laid out. So from this stage, you're going to want to begin to develop your conversion specification. This is going to be your guinea pig. It is the pilot that Joanne spoke about earlier. And clearly, this is the point where you want to get out all of the bugs that could derail the rest of the project. We for example, when we're performing conversion with data, we spend a considerable amount of time on the specification itself and going back and forth, checks and balances constantly. Does this match the requirement? Doesn't it? What needs to be tweaked? And continuing to do that until we find that that specification is really ready to move into full-blown production. From here, we then take the spec and we build out the program configuration. This is where we have obviously a huge benefit over DIY teams because we do use proprietary software that we build to meet all of the requirements that we have identified in the conversion specification. And we make certain that the software is configured to manage high volume, high accuracy levels, so on and so forth. And contrary to what you might have heard or read or seen, no automation software is going to take you 100% of the way through conversion. There always has to be some level of manual operation involved. You might be able to get 85, sometimes we even can get the software to take us 95% of the way through. But it also has a lot to do with what we've put into the process on the front end. But do beware of something that sounds like it's too good to be true, because I can assure you it probably is. But automation enables really a high quality output. It enables consistent tagging, and it really is critical because, again, it saves us considerable time and costs on the back end having to do QC. So from here, we can go into full production mode. The process is refined to handle any level of volume from low to high, but certainly keeps everything in sync. And this is the process we use also when we're converting simultaneous or performing simultaneous conversions from multiple data sets across multiple divisions in many times multiple languages and whatnot. So the production process at this point kind of runs on its own. And then, of course, volume production. You want to make sure that extensive planning enables you to have everything run smoothly. So if it happens to be, just a small pilot that you're testing, or it ends up being at a full production mode because you're ready to go there, or anything in between, this is the process that is going to bring you the highest level of success at the end. So Joanne, with that, I will turn the webinar back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That's just terrific. I think, it's really laid out a lot of the detail that people need to think about when they have, a huge volume of content that really needs to move into this new environment. So where have we been so far? We've talked about information modeling, selecting pilot projects, and then finding the way to get the content in the shape that you need it to move ahead, so that you have now DITA compliant content. There's just a couple of things I'd like to mention at the end of this process. In this next slide, you'll see that you really do need to plan for style sheets. And sometimes I think that's also kind of a mistaken concept. The DITA Open Toolkit comes with a test case style sheet that is not great, and in some cases completely inadequate. And people get confused by it. They say, okay, I'm going to publish, I'm going to use the DITA Open Toolkit. They press the publish button on their XML editor. It invokes the DITA Open Toolkit, and they get something that doesn't look very good. And that's right. That's what you're going to get. It's not going to look very good. It's going to look okay, and there's going to be things that are missing. I had someone who said recently, gee, I don't get an index. Well, the underlying program in the DITA Open Toolkit actually doesn't support indexes, or you may have an index that doesn't look anything like what you want. So what you have to recognize is that most cases, an expense of your project and time taken in your project will be to create style sheets. Then there are several style sheets you will probably need. If you're producing PDFs, we call it an XSL formatting object. And that's a style sheet that will produce PDF output. If your PDFs are very complex, or you have a lot of decoration in them, it's probably going to be more expensive to produce those style sheets. And usually you need some help to do that. It's a rare case where there's somebody in-house who knows how to do that. However, you might have somebody in-house who knows something about web output, XHTML, which is controlled by a cascading style sheet, a CSS style sheet. You may also need other kinds of style sheets for help systems or e-publishing or wiki output. And remember that this is part of the project. It's something you have to budget for. and depending upon how many languages you may publish, it can be complex. But, just make sure that you've included the time to do this, to create an output that looks pretty good or very good for your pilot project that you can then show to people as part of the success of your first foray into producing DITA output. It's something I think people sometimes make a mistake about and don't realize that they may need help. And then some training, knowledge transfer, to carry on this activity on their own. Okay, the next thing, kind of the big question that everybody has is, what about a content management system? Once your pilot is underway, you'll be in much better shape to define the use cases and the scenarios that you need to explain how you hope to work in the future. That becomes part of your requirements analysis, and the requirements document that you send is part of a request for proposal from a small list of vendors, a short list of vendors. And remember that not all content management systems, and definitely not web content management systems, will support working in the DITA environment. DITA is not regular XML, as my technical friends always remind me. DITA is really a special case implementation. So when somebody says, well, our web content management system handles XML content, it generally is not going to handle DITA content, not at all. Also, document management systems that handle content as blurbs, as single documents, is not going to handle DITA content very effectively. So you are looking for something that is specifically what we call component management. All those little XML pieces that you're trying to manage for reuse purposes, for conrefs and derefs, and all that DITA lingo, those are the things that you want to look for in a product set that you think is going to be helpful. And it's a short list these days. It's less than a dozen in most cases of things that will actually handle a DITA project effectively. It's one of the reasons I say, just be careful. Create a short list of possible systems. We help people do that. Develop a nice requirements document that is not too complicated. Get your IT group on your side so that they're supportive of this. A lot of times IT groups will say, well, we've got this system back in the closet that nobody's using, or this is our corporate standard. We're using, some giant document management and asset management system. And what you've got to know is that those things are not going to be much help to you. And you've got to be able to make that case that you need a special purpose system to really support what you're doing. Hopefully, it can be easily interconnected with a corporate system, but avoid something that doesn't provide the functionality that you need. But you see my point, that unless you're into your pilot project and you're working through your information model and you're thinking about your conversion, how will you know what you need in a CMS? So, that's a topic of a whole other webinar, I think, that we could provide. Then we have another poll, right? So I think our next to the last poll. Have you selected a content management system? And these are the possible answers. Please go ahead and make a choice. So we're waiting, thank goodness, or yes, we have one, or we've only started our requirements, or yes, we have a DITA aware CCMS in place. And we're getting some really, really interesting numbers. About 20% saying no, they're waiting. Close to 40% say yes, you have one in place. That's interesting. 31% starting on their requirements, and yes, 10% saying they have something that they probably can't use. Close the poll, share the results, and there you go. You can see these kinds of numbers. It's really, really interesting. I thank goodness that there's 22% that are waiting to see how they're going to do. And another small group, a third, has started requirements, and a third who already have things in place. And I'd certainly like to provide some help for the 10% who might end up being stuck. Okay, we're closing in on the hour here, and I do know we have a few questions. So there's our poll, and see if I can get to the next slide. Here we go. So learn from the innovators. Just to sum up, a small but focused project for your pilot. During the time of your pilot project, you create and refine your information model, knowing that it will change over the course of more implementations. Actually, the course of years probably, you'll be changing and updating that information model. Develop an authoring guide to help train new people coming in. Concentrate on your structured authoring. Help everyone learn the basics and develop a localization and publishing pipeline. Also, be sure to measure your success. How will you know if your pilot project is successful unless you've got some measurements that you could make? And what about subsequent projects? Are you decreasing translation costs or translation time? Are you increasing or decreasing hours per topic or hours per page? Are writers becoming more productive because they're reusing content more effectively? Think about your component content management system, specifically one that supports DITA and XML-based authoring. And recognize that you don't necessarily need a content management system to work with DITA, especially not in the early stages. But once you've got thousands of projects, it's really quickly going to become essential. Okay, let me see. There we go. And I said DCL and ComTech can help in many ways. This is a downloadable illustration. It's available on our website. And it's accompanied by the summary of the roadmap activities, that pictorial version of the roadmap activities. You've seen a little bit here. That's something to go out and look at. It's available on the comtech-serve.com website. And we have some upcoming events. I'm heading to Frankfurt on Saturday for a minimalism workshop. There's an information modeling workshop coming up in March, and a DITA boot camp following that, and a couple of other minimalism and agile environment classes. These are all listed on our website, actually. And we have some upcoming webinars, including the part 3 in March of this series as part of the DCL webinars. And finally, I've got one last question that Linda and I are interested in. We said we'd like you to register for part 3. There's the link to do that. Stay tuned for other series. We'd like to know if you have additional topics that you'd like us to cover as we think about, putting these series together in the future. And let's see. There we are. We have one last poll. How to measure the success of your project. Would you be interested in a webinar on measurements? So do a quick vote. And I think we got an overwhelming majority that say yes. And a few people still voting. There we go.
Joanne.
I think this is a good topic. We got 80% voting, so I'm going to cut it off and share the results. And yes, it sounds interesting. I'm not too surprised because often people don't know how to do the measurements. And if you don't have measurements of your existing, it's going to be really hard to do a comparison with the new. So that's something I think would be a really good topic, Linda, to look at next time around.
Definitely, definitely.
And here's our final, oh boy, hopefully I'm not going to skip the slide, but just our basic contact information. So thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you next time. There will be a recording of this available, and DCL will send out a notice to everybody who's been pre-registered for the workshop, and then of course you can sign up and register if you have people who would like to hear it. Vincent, I don't know if we have time for questions, but we can certainly answer those questions and send out a notice that like we did before.
Yeah, well, we've done the full hour, but if people do want to stick around and find out the answer to the questions right now, if you have time, we can do that. If anyone has any hard stops and has to go to a meeting or something, then
yeah, I think we have people dropping off pretty quickly, though.
Yeah.
Do you want to let's take a couple of questions. There's one about harmonizer here. Can harmonizer be applied post-conversion?
Certainly. Absolutely.
You can work on DITA files.
Yeah. Yeah, we most definitely can.
Neat.
I mean, it's, I think, more advantageous to look at it pre-conversion. However, if a project has already been completed and there's a reason why you'd like to have some additional QC done on it, or, be able to identify redundancies that you still have in your data set, it certainly could be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I see, let's see, do we have another one we can answer quickly?
There's one from Joseph Campo. How do you suggest choosing an XML authoring tool?
There's a lot of choices. There are sort of mainstream ones that are really appropriate for professional authors, that have lots and lots of capabilities. I hate to not mention somebody, so excuse me if I leave somebody out, but XMetal, ArborText, Oxygen are kind of our well-known mainstream products. Then there are a host of products also available, Simply DITA, Easy DITA, that are really geared to enterprise-wide offering for people who don't want to see XML, don't want to have to deal with the elements and attributes, but can work in an environment that's maybe similar to their traditional Word environment. So the things you have to take into account is who's doing the offering and what do they need to know how to do. Okay, do we have another one? My team's currently investigating CCMS's hard time finding products that offer DITA specific. Can you suggest names? What I would say to Darcy is send me an email. Again, I don't like to, leave somebody out inadvertently, but I can certainly give you a short list of DITA compliant CCMS systems. Anything else we should answer right away? Here's a good one. Besides drinking, what can you do if your company picks a CCMS without first defining the requirements or how well it will work for us? Yeah, I know, Lance. That's a great question. Drinking is always good, well, if you end up with that, you're stuck. There's probably some specifics that we could look at to say, is there a way to make this work, make something work? If it's not a product that knows anything about XML, you're probably going to have to rely on your editor to do the heavy lifting. Now, that's my best answer. That full-blown editors like XMetal, ArborText, Oxygen can do the heavy lifting. They can support things like version control system and basically let you do all your content creation, your map creation, all your reuse activities within the editor environment and simply use whatever content management system there is there as storage, because it's probably not going to help very much to do anything else. You know, the DITA has complex linking requirements. We need to know, if we're doing translation, I want to know when an element has changed, because I don't want to send the whole topic again for translation that's already been translated. And that's an intelligence within an XML and WHERE environment that you're not going to get in any other way. So heavy lifting by the editor, make a really good editor choice, and talk to us about, what could be done.
Joanne, one thing here, though, it goes back again to establishing a clear business case first, having your requirements all laid out before you even get into the rest of this. This is a perfect example of the types of situations that Joanne and I run across with our clients on a regular basis, because the full picture has not been taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. I just had a situation that came up today, of an IT department that says we've always done everything ourselves, homegrown systems. You can't imagine what the investment would be to create a homegrown DITA XML environment. Gee. But then, they want everybody to work in something that isn't working. I think there's also the feeling that content management of all sorts, document management, management of graphics, digital asset management, what's called DAM, web content management. Today, you're not going to find one system that does everything. It's just not where the market's been, what vendors are producing. What you want is, a variety of systems that support special cases. Unfortunately, that means maintenance of those. That's why a lot of vendors today are offering hosted solutions, software as a service, because they know that IT organizations are stretched and have a hard time supporting so many different kinds of products, or don't know them well, and really can't support them very effectively. And conversion to DITA is taking an exhaustive amount of time and effort to maintain the focus and motivations to succeed. Linda, this is a good one. If conversion to DITA is taking an exhaustive amount of time and effort, how do you maintain the focus and motivation to succeed?
Oh, my goodness. Well, do we have another hour for me to answer that question? I guess the first thing you really need to do is identify why is it taking so much time and effort. Because there may be ways that you can, even midstream, cut that down, so that your team will be much more engaged. So I think looking at what are the issues, what are the concerns, what are the pitfalls, what kind of roadblocks might you be running up against, so on and so forth, is really going to be important. And this is part of the problem, again, that we talked about earlier, Joanne, because, people don't realize until they get into it what a mess this can be and how truly time-consuming it is. And part of the reason is because you're not generally employing the type of automation that, potentially an outsourced vendor may be able to bring to the equation, and so on and so forth. And, I will just answer this real quickly, and I'll be happy to speak with this individual offline if they'd like to contact me. But one very quick horror story that happened to come from an airline who got, they were convinced they could handle this on their own, the conversion on their own, ended up bringing in, I don't know, like 40 independent people to do this project. You cannot imagine what a mess this was. Forget the timeline, forget motivation. It was just a complete disaster. And the one thing he said to me was, why the heck didn't you insist that I hire you in the first place? So I thought that was pretty funny.
Right. Well, I think we've got about 15 minutes over, and thank you, the 44 of you remaining or so. I hope this worked out very well, and look forward to talking to you next month.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.